I never thought my life at 67 would be shattered by 5 words whispered at a funeral. "You're too weak to handle the truth." That's what my daughter Emily said to me as she stood over her mother's casket. The woman who had walked out on us 23 years ago without explanation. What truth could be so devastating that my own child believed I couldn't bear it? What secrets had my ex-wife Margaret taken to her grave? When I discovered a hidden cassette tape labeled, "For Helen After I'm Gone," in my basement, I had no idea that pressing play would unravel decades of lies, betrayal, and a family secret that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the daughter I raised alone. Follow our channel for more heartbreaking true stories that will leave you questioning who you can really trust. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and what you would do if your entire life turned out to be built on lies. I'll never forget that freezing cold day at the small church in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The scent of lilies mixed with the ancient wood of the casket seemed to suffocate me with each breath I took. I was 67 years old, standing there in my black dress that hung a little looser than it did at the last funeral I attended. My arthritic hands clutched my worn leather purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. The room was packed wall to wall. Faces I recognized from decades ago, others I'd never seen before. But every single pair of eyes seemed to look right through me, as if I were nothing but a ghost haunting my own life. My daughter Emily, her mascara already smudged from crying, approached her mother's body in the open casket. I watched her slender shoulders shake as she bent down to whisper something. I thought she was saying a final goodbye to Margaret, the woman who had walked out of our lives 23 years ago without so much as a goodbye note. The woman whose death had somehow brought us all back together in this suffocating little church. But then Emily turned, her eyes briefly meeting mine across the room. Her lips trembled as she muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "You're too weak to handle the truth about her." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered backward, bumping into Mrs. Peterson from down the street, who steadied me with a concerned look. Too weak? Me? The woman who raised our daughter alone after Margaret left? The woman who worked 2 jobs and still made it to every school play and parent-teacher conference? The woman who survived breast cancer 5 years ago without anyone but the neighbors to drive me to chemo? What truth could possibly be so terrible that my own daughter thought I couldn't bear it? In that moment, it felt like the wooden floor beneath me had splintered open. The organ music playing Amazing Grace suddenly sounded distant, as if I were underwater. Around me, people dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs and whispered in hushed tones about what a terrible loss Margaret's passing was. Did they know something I didn't? What secrets had my ex-wife taken to her grave, or worse, shared with everyone except me? Emily avoided my gaze for the rest of the service, standing on the opposite side of the casket, surrounded by Margaret's family, people who had once been my family too. Her Uncle Robert, my former brother-in-law, had his arm around her shoulders, comforting her in a way I suddenly wasn't allowed to. As the minister spoke about forgiveness and complicated lives, I found myself staring at Margaret's peaceful face. She looked older, of course, but still beautiful in that way that had first caught my eye at the Dairy Queen in 1975. Her hair was styled the same way she'd always worn it, and someone had applied her signature coral lipstick. She looked like herself, but I realized with a start that I no longer knew who that self was. What had happened in the years since she walked out our front door, suitcase in hand, claiming she needed space? What kind of life had she built without us? And what terrible truth about her was my daughter protecting me from? The questions burned inside me like acid, eating away at the fragile peace I'd constructed over 2 decades of her absence. Each sympathetic nod from a mourner, each whispered condolence felt like another piece of evidence that I was the only one who didn't know the full story. When the service ended, I waited by the church steps, hoping to catch Emily before she left. The November wind whipped around us, sending dead leaves skittering across the cemetery, where they were about to lower Margaret into the ground. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling every one of my 67 years in my bones. "Emily," I called as she emerged from the church. "Honey, wait." She paused, her red-rimmed eyes meeting mine for just a moment before looking away. "Not now, Mom. I can't do this right now." "Do what?" "Emily, what did you mean in there? What truth don't you think I can handle?" She shook her head, her dark hair, so like her mother's, falling across her face. "Please, just let it be. Some things are better left in the past." Before I could respond, Robert appeared at her side. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice carrying that same warm authority it always had. He'd aged well, silver streaking through his dark hair, his face lined but still handsome. "Fine," Emily said quickly. "We're fine." Robert gave me a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Helen, I'm sorry for your loss. I know it's complicated, but she was important to all of us." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. The way his hand rested on Emily's shoulder. The way my daughter leaned into him just slightly. The way his wedding ring caught the weak winter sunlight. "I need to understand what's happening," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I deserve to know what everyone else seems to already understand." Emily's face hardened. "No, Mom. Trust me when I say you're too weak to handle it. Let's just get through today." As they walked away together toward the waiting cars, I stood frozen on those church steps. The word weak echoed in my head, each repetition like another slap across my face. In my entire life, no one had ever called me weak. Not during the divorce, not during cancer, not during all those years of struggling to make ends meet. I knew right then that I would discover whatever truth they were hiding from me, no matter what it cost. Because the only thing I couldn't bear was being the last to know what had really happened to the family I thought I had. Standing alone as the funeral procession formed, I made a silent promise to myself. This would not be the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The week after the funeral passed, in a blur of casseroles dropped off by neighbors and phone calls, I let go to voicemail. I couldn't bear to hear one more person tell me how sorry they were about Margaret's passing, when I could see in their eyes they knew something I didn't. Every sympathetic head tilt felt like mockery. That Friday night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The old farmhouse Margaret and I had bought together in 1978, the one I'd managed to keep in the divorce by working overtime for years, creaked and groaned against the bitter wind. I'd turned the heat up, but the cold seemed to seep through the walls anyway, settling deep in my bones. Sleep wouldn't come, not with Emily's words playing on repeat in my mind. "You're too weak to handle the truth." I'd called her 3 times since the funeral, but she'd been brief, distant, making excuses to get off the phone. "I'm just processing, Mom," she'd said. "We all grieve differently." But I knew my daughter. There was more she wasn't saying. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep altogether. Wrapping my faded blue robe tightly around me, I padded down to the basement with a flashlight, determined to distract myself by finally organizing the storage boxes I'd been meaning to sort through for years. The basement air was damp and musty. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled in my neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, Emily's school projects, tax records 1980, 1990. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind an old bicycle, I spotted a box I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled in my handwriting. In fact, it wasn't labeled at all. My heart began to race as I pulled it out. It was an old shoebox, the kind that once held Margaret's favorite leather pumps from Gimbel's department store. The cardboard was soft with age, the corners worn. I hesitated before lifting the lid, some part of me already knowing this wasn't something I was meant to find. Inside, nestled among tissue paper that had long since yellowed, were several cassette tapes. Each was labeled in Margaret's distinctive handwriting, slanted and elegant, with loops on her G's and Y's that I used to tease her about. Most were simply dated, but one caught my eye immediately. It was marked, "For Helen, after I'm gone." My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the tape. The basement suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Margaret had left me a message from beyond the grave. When had she recorded this? How had it ended up hidden in my basement? And most importantly, why had she never told me about it? I carried the box upstairs like it contained nitroglycerin, setting it carefully on the kitchen table. The old cassette player I kept in the living room hadn't been used in years, but I knew it still worked. Emily had used it last Christmas to play some old carols we'd recorded when she was little. Sitting there in my kitchen with only the dim light above the stove illuminating the room, I stared at that tape for what felt like hours. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at shadows. My throat felt dry, my palms sweaty. Why was I so afraid to listen to my ex-wife's voice? Because deep down I knew. Whatever was on this tape was the truth Emily thought I was too weak to handle. I shuffled to the living room and dug the cassette player out from under the TV stand. The silver machine looked like an artifact from another life, covered in a thin layer of dust. I plugged it in, pressed the eject button, and watched the little door pop open. With fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, I inserted Margaret's tape and pressed play. Nothing happened at first, just the soft, mechanical whir of the tape spinning. Then a click, followed by silence. I leaned forward, straining to hear. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Had Margaret left me a blank tape as her final goodbye? But then, just as I was about to hit stop, I heard it. A soft intake of breath, the sound of someone, Margaret, gathering courage. Helen. Her voice filled my living room and my heart nearly stopped. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone. Really gone this time. The sound of her voice, older than I remembered, raspier but unmistakably hers, made me gasp. I pressed pause immediately, overcome. How many nights had I lain awake after she left, trying to remember exactly how her voice sounded? And now here it was, preserved like an insect in amber, speaking directly to me from whatever came after life. I sat in the dark, clutching the arms of my chair, trying to catch my breath. On the end table beside me sat the framed photo I'd never had the heart to put away. Margaret, Emily, and me at the Grand Canyon, all smiling in the sunshine. No hint of the fractures that would eventually shatter us. "What did you do, Margaret?" I whispered to the frozen tape player. What truth could possibly be so terrible? Only one way to find out. With a deep breath, I pressed play again, steeling myself for whatever confession was about to change everything I thought I knew about my life. The tape began with several seconds of silence, just the soft hiss of magnetic film spinning. Then Margaret cleared her throat, and I could almost picture her sitting somewhere, perhaps at the kitchen table we used to share, gathering her thoughts before speaking. Helen. Her voice was softer than I remembered, worn at the edges. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone. Really gone this time. She paused, and I heard what sounded like ice cubes clinking in a glass. Was she drinking? Margaret rarely drank. Just a glass of white wine at Christmas and on our anniversary. The thought that she might have needed liquid courage to make this recording sent a chill through me. I've tried to record this so many times over the years, she continued, her voice steadier now. I've thrown away dozens of tapes, started over and over. How do you confess the worst mistake of your life? How do you admit to the one sin you can never take back? My hand flew to my mouth. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the darkness, marking each second of revelation. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers trying to get in. We were so young when we met, Margaret said, her voice taking on a dreamlike quality. Remember that summer at Cedar Point? You in that yellow sundress? Me pretending I knew how to drive a stick shift? She laughed softly, the sound so achingly familiar it made my chest hurt. I thought I knew what love was then. I thought I understood what forever meant when I promised it to you. I closed my eyes, transported back to that summer of 1975, the humid Ohio air, the scent of cotton candy and lake water, Margaret's hand in mine as we walked along the midway. We were just kids, me 21, her 19, with no idea how complicated life would become. But love isn't simple, is it, Helen? Her voice had hardened slightly. It's messy and confusing. Sometimes it leads you places you never thought you'd go, makes you do things you swore you never would. My stomach clenched. What was she building toward? An affair? I'd suspected as much when she left. The way she couldn't meet my eyes those last few months. The mysterious phone calls that ended when I entered the room. But if that was all it was, why the secrecy now, all these years later? I made choices in moments of weakness, moments when I felt alone, even when I wasn't. There was a tremor in her voice now. The summer of '82 was the worst, do you remember? Emily was 4. You were working so hard at the hospital, pulling double shifts to save for her college fund. You were a good mother, Helen. A better mother than I ever was. The compliment landed like a slap. Margaret had always been the fun parent, the one who built blanket forts and baked cookies shaped like dinosaurs. I was the practical one, the one who made sure bills were paid and doctor's appointments were kept. To hear her say I was the better mother felt wrong somehow, like the universe had tilted slightly off its axis. I told myself it was just once, a mistake, something we could all move past without anyone getting hurt. She took a deep, shuddering breath. But lies have a way of growing, don't they? One becomes 2, becomes 20, becomes a life built on sand. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room seemed to be spinning slightly. What was she talking about? What lie had she been living? Robert came to stay with us that summer, remember? After his divorce from Diane. Robert, her younger brother, my brother-in-law. The memory crystallized instantly. Robert showing up at our door with a duffel bag and red-rimmed eyes, asking if he could crash on our couch, just until he found his footing. He'd stayed for nearly 3 months. He was broken, Helen, and I was lonely in a way I couldn't explain, not even to myself. The implication hung in the air like smoke. My head pounded as the pieces began to click into place. Robert's extended stay, the hushed conversations I'd walk in on, the way Margaret couldn't look at me across the dinner table. It was just once, Margaret's voice insisted, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. One night when you were on call at the hospital. One stupid, terrible mistake. I hit pause, unable to breathe. The living room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. I staggered to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on my face, trying to ground myself in the physical sensation. The clock on the microwave read 3:17 a.m. The whole world was asleep except for me, alone with this bombshell from the past. When I returned to the living room, I stood over the cassette player for a long moment. Did I really want to know the rest? Was Emily right? Was I too weak to handle this truth? But I'd come too far to turn back now. With a trembling finger, I pressed play again. We swore it would never happen again, Margaret continued, her voice thick with what sounded like tears. We promised each other it was a one-time mistake. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Actions have consequences. Inescapable, life-altering consequences. My blood ran cold as I sank back into my chair. Whatever she was about to say, I suddenly knew with absolute certainty that it would change everything. I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks later. The words hung in the air like an axe about to fall. My mind raced back, calculating dates, remembering that summer. I had been working so much, trying to save enough for Emily's college fund and the new roof we needed. Margaret had been sick. Morning sickness, she'd said. Just a stomach bug that wouldn't quit. Except it wasn't a stomach bug at all. I told you it was yours, Helen, and you believed me. You were so happy, so excited to expand our family. Her voice broke, and I convinced myself it was better this way. That the truth would only hurt everyone. That what you didn't know couldn't hurt you. I pressed pause again, my entire body shaking. The room swam before my eyes as the full impact of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. Emily, my beautiful, brilliant daughter, the light of my life for 38 years, not mine after all. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, the paused cassette player before me like some kind of ticking bomb. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking through the winter clouds, casting long shadows across my living room floor. Emily wasn't mine. The thought repeated itself in my mind, each iteration more painful than the last. Not biologically, at least. The child I had rocked to sleep with fever at 2 a.m. The teenager whose tears I had wiped away after her first heartbreak. The woman whose college graduation I had attended with a heart so full of pride it threatened to burst. Not my flesh and blood after all, but Robert's, my former brother-in-law. The man who had stood beside me at Margaret's funeral, his arm around my daughter, his daughter, consoling her in her grief. With hands that felt disconnected from my body, I pressed play again. Robert doesn't know, Margaret's voice continued, and I could hear the strain in it. Or at least he didn't at first. I told him I lost the baby, that it was a false alarm. He was relieved, said it was for the best. She gave a bitter laugh. For the best. As if erasing a life could ever be that. I remembered that time. How Robert had suddenly announced he'd found an apartment across town. How he'd stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. I'd assumed he was just getting his life back together after his divorce, creating some healthy distance. Never once had I suspected there was more to the story. But secrets have a way of surfacing, Margaret continued. When Emily was born with those blue eyes, Robert's eyes, his mother's eyes, I convinced myself it was coincidence. Thompson family genes, skipping a generation. You never questioned it. Why would you? I closed my eyes, picturing Emily's face. Those startling azure eyes had always stood out against her dark hair, so unlike my hazel ones, or Margaret's deep brown. How many times had strangers commented on them? Where did she get those blue eyes? They'd ask. And Margaret would laugh and say, my grandmother had eyes that color. Another lie in a tapestry of deception. Years passed. Emily grew, and I thought we were safe, that the secret would stay buried. Margaret's voice turned hollow, until that Christmas when Emily was 12, and Robert brought his new girlfriend to dinner. The way she stared at Emily across the table, the way she kept looking between them. I knew she saw it, the resemblance that I'd been denying for years. I remembered that Christmas vividly. Stephanie had been her name, a pediatric nurse with a tinkling laugh who wore too much perfume. She hadn't lasted long in Robert's life, gone by Valentine's Day if I recalled correctly. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Robert had never been one to maintain relationships after his divorce. She confronted him later. I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. She'd noticed how similar they looked. The eyes, the way they both tilted their heads when they were thinking. Even the same allergies to strawberries. Margaret's voice trembled. Robert denied it, of course. Called her crazy, paranoid, but I could see in his eyes that he was doing the math, connecting dots he'd never allowed himself to connect before. The kitchen. I'd walked in on them that night. Robert and Stephanie in what looked like an intense discussion. They'd broken apart when they saw me. Stephanie's face flushed. Robert's expression guarded. Just debating the best way to make eggnog, he'd said with a forced laugh. I'd accepted the explanation without question. How blind I had been. How willfully, desperately blind. After that, things changed, Margaret continued. Robert started coming around more often, taking a special interest in Emily, offering to drive her to soccer practice or help with her science projects. I told myself he was just being a good uncle, but deep down I knew. He was watching his daughter grow up from the sidelines. My mind raced back through the years, reframing every memory with this new knowledge. Robert teaching Emily to ride a bike in the driveway while I made lemonade. Robert showing up at her high school graduation with a gift far too expensive for an uncle, a sapphire necklace that matched her eyes. Robert walking her down the aisle at her wedding 6 years ago when I'd been too sick with pneumonia to attend. Each memory cut deeper than the last. Not just Margaret's betrayal, but years of being made a fool. Years of playing a role in a drama I didn't even know I was part of. When Emily was 17, she found a letter I'd written, a confession I never meant to send. She confronted me, Helen, demanded the truth. Margaret's voice broke. What could I do? She was old enough to understand, to make her own judgments. So I told her everything. 17, the year everything changed. The year Emily became distant, withdrawn. The year she started spending more weekends at friends' houses that I later discovered were actually visits to Robert's. The year Margaret and I began fighting more frequently about everything and nothing. The beginning of the end of our marriage. She was so angry with me, so hurt, but she made a decision that broke my heart all over again. Margaret's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. She said you must never know, that it would destroy you, that you weren't strong enough to handle losing her too. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter, the person I loved most in this world, had been keeping this secret from me for over 20 years, had decided at 17 that I was too fragile to know the truth about my own family. So we agreed, to protect you from the truth. It was Emily's condition for forgiving me, that you would never have to bear this burden. Margaret sighed deeply. Maybe we were wrong, Helen. Maybe the truth would have hurt less back then than it will now. But it's too late for maybes. I clicked the tape off, unable to bear another word. The dawn had broken fully now. Pale winter sunlight filtering through the curtains. In that cold morning light, my life, the life I thought I'd lived, looked like nothing more than a cruel joke. I spent the entire day in a fog, moving through my house like a ghost in my own life. I made coffee I didn't drink. I picked up a book only to set it down again, unable to focus on a single word. The tape sat on the coffee table, silent now, but somehow still filling the room with its presence. Around noon, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Emily's voice filled the kitchen. Mom, just checking in. I hope you're doing okay after yesterday. Call me back when you can. Her voice sounded different to me now. Had there always been a hint of Robert's cadence in her speech? That slight pause before important words? The way her sentences lifted at the end, even when not asking a question? I stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. What would I even say to her? I know you're not really mine. Why did you lie to me for 20 years? The words stuck in my throat, choking me with their weight. Instead, I found myself digging through old photo albums. The large leather-bound ones Margaret had meticulously maintained before she left, and the simpler ones I'd put together in the years after. I spread them across the dining room table, flipping pages with trembling fingers. There was Emily on her first birthday, cake smeared across her cherubic face, her 5th Christmas, proudly holding up the bicycle Santa had brought, her high school graduation, tassel swinging as she threw her cap in the air, and in almost every family photo, there he was, Robert, standing slightly apart but always present, at barbecues, holiday gatherings, school events. I had never questioned his constant presence in our lives. He was family, after all, Margaret's only sibling, Emily's beloved uncle, except he wasn't just her uncle, was he? I studied his face in a photo from Emily's 16th birthday. They stood side by side, both laughing at some forgotten joke. The resemblance I had never allowed myself to see now seemed glaringly obvious. The same high cheekbones, the identical crinkle around their eyes when they smiled. Even the way they stood, weight shifted slightly to the left. How had I been so blind? But it wasn't blindness, not really. It was trust, the kind of bone-deep trust that never questions, never doubts. I had trusted Margaret completely, had built my entire world on the foundation of that trust, and she had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I moved to a more recent photo, Emily's wedding 6 years ago. She looked radiant in her white gown, her blue eyes sparkling with happiness. I had been too sick to attend the ceremony, my body weak from a bout of pneumonia that had landed me in the hospital. It was Robert who had walked her down the aisle in my place, Robert who had given the toast at the reception, Robert who had danced the father-daughter dance with her. The irony was almost too much to bear. Another photo caught my eye, one I hadn't looked at in years. It showed the 4 of us at a 4th of July picnic when Emily was about 7. Margaret and I flanked her, with Robert kneeling beside her. We were all smiling, sparklers in hand, the perfect picture of a happy extended family. But as I looked closer, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Robert's hand on Emily's shoulder, possessive in a way I hadn't recognized then. Margaret's body angled slightly away from me, toward him. Emily leaning into his touch, unconsciously perhaps, but unmistakably. The signs had been there all along. Little moments, small gestures that seemed innocent at the time but now screamed of deception. Like the Christmas when Emily was 9, and Robert had given her an antique music box that had belonged to his grandmother. It should stay in the family, he'd said, and I'd thought nothing of it. Family. The word had a bitter taste now. Or the time when Emily was 14 and broke her arm falling from a tree. Robert had been the first one at the hospital, arriving even before Margaret. He'd paced the waiting room like a nervous father, not a concerned uncle. I'd even commented on it at the time. You'd think she was your kid. And he'd laughed too loudly, too forcefully. So many moments, so many clues I'd dismissed or rationalized away. The afternoon light was fading when I finally returned to the living room and the waiting tape player. There was more to Margaret's confession. I could sense it. More pain to endure, more truths to face. Did I have the strength to listen? Or was Emily right? Was I too weak to handle the full truth? I thought of my life since Margaret had left. The lonely nights, the struggle to make ends meet while putting Emily through college, the empty nest years filled with work and little else. I had survived it all. Not just survived, but built a life for myself. A quiet life perhaps, but my own. I was not weak. I had never been weak. With renewed determination, I pressed play again, steeling myself for whatever came next. Emily begged me not to tell you. Margaret's voice continued, sounding weary now. She said it would only hurt you, that what you didn't know couldn't hurt you, and I was selfish enough to agree. It was easier than facing your pain, your anger. I could picture Emily at 17, fierce, protective, already showing the stubborn streak that would define her adult personality. Had she really been trying to protect me? Or was she protecting her relationship with Robert, her biological father? But the weight of the secret changed us all, Margaret said. Changed our family in ways I never anticipated. Emily became distant from you. I couldn't look you in the eye knowing what I'd done. And the guilt, God, Helen, the guilt was eating me alive. She paused and I heard what sounded like a muffled sob. That's why I left. Not because I didn't love you anymore, but because I couldn't bear to keep living the lie. Every day was another betrayal. Every moment of happiness felt stolen. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. For 23 years I'd believed Margaret had left because she'd fallen out of love with me, because I wasn't enough, because she wanted something, someone else. I had carried that rejection like a stone in my heart for over 2 decades, but she hadn't left because she didn't love me. She'd left because she did. In its own twisted way, it was almost a relief. As the tape continued to play, I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. The house felt suddenly colder, as if the temperature had dropped with each revelation. Outside, the winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across my living room. I hadn't eaten all day, hadn't even thought about food. My stomach was a knot of anxiety, grief, and something else. A growing anger that burned like coals in my chest. "There's something else you need to know, Helen." Margaret's voice continued, heavy with what sounded like years of guilt. "Something I've never told anyone, not even Emily." I tensed, bracing myself. What more could there possibly be? What other bombshell could she drop that would further devastate the ruins of what I thought was my life? "The truth is," her voice faltered, then steadied, with what seemed like a final resolve. "The truth is that your daughter Emily never was the child of the man you believed to be her father. The blood that runs in her veins belongs to his brother instead." Even though I'd already pieced this together from her earlier confessions, hearing it stated so plainly, so baldly, made my entire body go cold. The room tilted around me, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. I gripped the arms of my chair, forcing myself to breathe deeply through the wave of dizziness. "Robert is Emily's biological father," Margaret continued, each word like a nail in the coffin of my former life. "Not just her uncle, not just my brother, her father." I pressed pause, needing a moment to collect myself. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times, marking the hour with solemn finality. 6 o'clock. Normally, I would be starting dinner about now, setting the table for one, perhaps turning on the evening news for company. Instead, I sat paralyzed, my world shattered into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. When I finally felt steady enough to continue, I pressed play again. "I know this changes everything," Margaret said, her voice softer now. "I know you have every right to hate me, to hate us both, but please, Helen, don't hate Emily. She was an innocent in all this. She didn't ask to be born into this mess, to carry the burden of our mistakes." A sob rose in my throat, unexpected and raw. Did Margaret really think I could hate Emily? The child I had raised from infancy? The little girl whose skinned knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose achievements I had celebrated as if they were my own? Biology didn't change that. Nothing could change that. "When Emily found out the truth, she was devastated," Margaret continued. "She locked herself in her room for days, refused to speak to either of us. I thought we'd lost her completely. I remembered that week vividly. Emily at 17, suddenly withdrawn and hostile. Margaret explaining it away as teenage hormones and college application stress. I had worried, of course, but trusted my wife's assessment. After all, Margaret had always been the one who understood Emily best, or so I had thought. When she finally emerged, she'd made a decision, Margaret said. She would maintain a relationship with Robert as her father, but secretly. She didn't want to hurt you, Helen. Said you'd been through enough already with your own parents' divorce, with your mother's early death. My mind flashed to my mother, gone too young from breast cancer when Emily was just a toddler. I had grieved deeply, having lost not only my mother but my last remaining parent. Margaret had been my rock then, holding me through tears, taking over childcare when grief left me unable to function. Had she been carrying her own secret guilt even then? Emily made us both promise that you would never know, Margaret continued. She said it would destroy you, that you weren't strong enough to handle losing her too, after losing so much already. The words cut deep. Not strong enough. The same phrase Emily had used at the funeral. My own daughter had judged me and found me wanting, had decided at 17 that I was too fragile to handle the truth, that I needed to be protected from reality, like a child. So we agreed, Margaret sighed, to protect you from the truth. It was Emily's condition for forgiving me, that you would never have to bear this burden. I sat perfectly still, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. Protection, as if being lied to for decades was some kind of gift, as if being the only one not to know the truth about my own family was a kindness. After that, things were never the same between us, Margaret continued. I couldn't look you in the eye knowing what I'd done. Every moment of happiness felt stolen. Every "I love you" felt like another lie. The guilt was unbearable. I remembered how she had pulled away in those final months before leaving, how she'd flinch when I touched her, how she'd started sleeping on the edge of the bed, as far from me as possible without actually moving to the couch. When I finally left, it wasn't because I didn't love you anymore, she said, echoing what she'd begun to say earlier. It was because I loved you too much to keep hurting you with my presence. Because every day I stayed was another day I was living a lie. Another day I was betraying you all over again. A bitter laugh escaped me, echoing in the empty house. What magnificent self-delusion. What extraordinary mental gymnastics to cast abandonment as an act of love. I know you won't believe this. Margaret's voice wavered. But leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than confessing to Emily. Harder than living with the knowledge of my betrayal. Because I knew that in leaving, I was hurting you in ways you didn't even understand. I thought of the years after she left. The confusion, the self-doubt. The nights spent wondering what I had done wrong. What fatal flaw in me had driven away the woman I loved. All that pain, all that questioning based on a lie. I've made so many mistakes, Helen. Margaret was crying now, her voice thick with tears. Unforgivable mistakes. But loving you was never one of them. And I hope that someday, when you hear this, you might find it in your heart to understand, if not to forgive. The tape clicked off, the final confession delivered. In its wake, the room felt cavernous, empty, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Outside, night had fallen completely. I sat in the dark, tears streaming down my face, unable to move, unable to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. My entire life, or at least the last 38 years of it, had been built on a foundation of lies. My marriage, my motherhood, my understanding of who I was and what my life meant. All of it, tainted by deception. And the worst part? Everyone had known but me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, exhausted by grief and shock, because I woke with a start at 3 a.m. still sitting in my armchair. My neck was stiff, my mouth dry. The cassette player sat on the coffee table, silent now, but somehow still radiating its terrible truth into the dark room. For a moment I wondered if it had all been a nightmare, if I would get up, make coffee, and go about my day as the same Helen Parker I'd been yesterday. Widow, retired nurse, mother of one. But the ache in my chest told me otherwise. The truth had been spoken aloud and there was no unhearing it. I shuffled to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it standing at the sink, staring out at the moonlit backyard. The old oak tree where we'd hung Emily's swing cast long shadows across the patchy snow. How many hours had I spent pushing her on that swing, watching her soar higher and higher, her laughter carrying on the summer breeze. "Higher, Mom, I want to touch the clouds." Mom, the word echoed in my mind. Was I still her mother if we didn't share blood? If the entire foundation of our relationship had been built on a lie? Of course I was. Biology wasn't what made me her mother. It was the thousands of lunches packed, the midnight fevers soothed, the tears dried, the triumphs celebrated. It was showing up day after day, year after year, with unconditional love. But even as I reassured myself, anger began to simmer beneath my grief. Not just at Margaret and Robert for their betrayal, but at Emily, my sweet, strong-willed daughter, who had decided at 17 that I was too weak to handle the truth, who had maintained that deception for over 20 years, even after Margaret left, even into her own adulthood, who had stood in that church just days ago and whispered that I was too weak to handle the truth about her mother. I moved to the worn leather armchair by the window, the one that had been my father's before he passed, and sank into it, pulling the Afghan from the back to wrap around my shoulders. The night was utterly still, the kind of deep winter quiet that seems to swallow all sound. In that silence, I let myself feel the full weight of my anger, my hurt, my sense of betrayal. Emily had robbed me of agency, of the right to know the truth about my own life, my own family. She had made a decision about what I could and couldn't handle, a decision that wasn't hers to make. And in doing so, she had perpetuated a lie that had shaped decades of my existence. The realization burned in my chest like acid. All those years of strained holidays, of conversations that seemed to stop when I entered the room, of inside jokes I wasn't privy to. All those moments when Emily and Robert seemed to share a connection I couldn't quite understand. It hadn't been my imagination. It had been deliberate exclusion. As dawn began to break, pale light filtering through the frost-covered windows, I made a decision. This secret wouldn't die with Margaret. It wouldn't continue to fester in darkness. The truth, all of it, needed to come to light. But how? What would I even say? I know Emily isn't biologically mine. I know about you and Robert. The very thought of confronting them made my heart race with anxiety. Would they deny it? Make excuses? Try to convince me I had misunderstood? And what about the extended family? Margaret's parents were long gone, but Robert and Emily weren't the only ones who knew. There had to be others, cousins, friends, perhaps even neighbors, who had been part of this conspiracy of silence. How many people had been laughing behind my back all these years? The humiliation was almost as painful as the betrayal. I picked up the phone, then set it down again. This wasn't a conversation to have over the telephone. This needed to be face-to-face, where I could see their expressions, gauge their reactions, where they could see mine and understand the depth of the pain they had caused. Moving to my desk, I pulled out a notepad and began to write. Names, dates, connections, mapping out the web of deception as best I could from what Margaret had revealed. There were still gaps, still questions that needed answers. When exactly had Emily learned the truth? Who else knew? Why had Margaret chosen to make this confession now, after her death, rather than during her life? The more I wrote, the clearer my path forward became. I would invite them all to dinner. Emily, Robert, even a few extended family members who had been close to Margaret. I would create a space where the truth could finally be spoken aloud, where decades of lies could be brought into the light. Not for revenge, though God knows a part of me wanted that. Not to hurt Emily or Robert, though their pain seemed like just punishment for the pain they had inflicted on me. But for closure, for the chance to finally move forward with the whole truth, however ugly it might be. I looked at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. Sunday dinner. It had been our tradition when Margaret and I were married. Family gathered around the dining room table, sharing food and stories. It seemed fitting that Sunday dinner would be the setting for this final revelation. As the sun rose fully, casting golden light across my kitchen floor, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had already happened. The foundation of my life had been revealed as sand, not bedrock. Yet here I was, still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. Perhaps I was stronger than Emily gave me credit for. Perhaps I always had been. I picked up the phone again, and this time I dialed Emily's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mom, is everything okay? It's barely 7. Everything's fine," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I was wondering if you and Robert would come to dinner this Sunday. There's something important I need to discuss with you both." A pause then. I could almost hear her mind working, trying to decipher my tone, my intent. "Sure, Mom. Is this about the will? Because you really don't need to worry about that right now." "It's not about the will," I interrupted. "It's about family, about truth, about things that have been hidden for far too long." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had a cautious edge to it. "Mom, what's this about?" I thought about lying, about making up some benign reason for the dinner invitation. It would have been easy, so much easier than standing in my truth. But I was done with lies, done with evasions. "It's about the recording, Emily. The one your mother left for me. The one that explains who your real father is." The silence that followed was deafening. Sunday arrived with a crystalline clarity that only comes after a heavy snowfall. The world outside my windows was transformed into a pristine wonderland. Tree branches heavy with white. The road in front of the house smoothed into an unbroken blanket of snow. The beauty of it all seemed almost offensive given the turmoil inside me. After my phone call with Emily, the days had passed in a blur of preparation. Not just the practical matters, cleaning the house, planning the meal, setting the table with the good china we only used for holidays, but emotional preparation as well. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it. I imagined their reactions, steeled myself for denial, for anger, for tears. Emily had been suspiciously quiet since our call. She texted once, "We'll be there. 5 p.m., okay?" But nothing more. No questions about what I'd found, no attempts to explain or justify. Just silence, heavy with anticipation. I'd spent hours debating whether to invite others. In the end, I decided against it. This first reckoning needed to be intimate, contained to the 3 of us most directly affected. There would be time later for wider circles of truth. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, startling me from my thoughts. Only an hour until they arrived. I checked the pot roast in the oven. Margaret's recipe, ironically enough. The same meal I'd made for countless Sunday dinners when we were still a family, still whole. The familiar scent of rosemary and garlic filled the kitchen, incongruously comforting amid so much upheaval. I placed the cassette player in the center of the dining table like some sort of twisted centerpiece. The tape was still inside, ready to play its devastating confession to a wider audience. I'd debated whether to let them hear it or simply tell them what it contained. In the end, I decided Margaret's own voice should be the one to break the decades of silence. It seemed fitting somehow. At precisely 5:07 p.m., Emily had always run a few minutes late, even as a child. The doorbell rang. I smoothed my hands over my dark blue dress, took a deep breath, and went to answer it. They stood together on the porch, Emily and Robert, snow dusting their shoulders and hair. She looked so much like him. How had I never seen it before? The same strong jaw, the same slight furrow between their brows when concerned. Even their posture was similar. Weight shifted slightly to the right, shoulders squared as if bracing for impact. "Mom," Emily said, her voice carefully neutral. She leaned in to kiss my cheek, her perfume, something floral and expensive, enveloping me briefly. She'd lost weight since the funeral, her cheekbones more pronounced, shadows beneath her striking blue eyes. Robert's eyes. "Helen," Robert nodded, handing me a bottle of red wine. Cabernet Sauvignon, my favorite. He'd always remembered little details like that. Now I wondered if it had been guilt rather than thoughtfulness that had motivated such gestures over the years. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Dinner's almost ready." They entered, shedding coats and boots in the entryway with the practiced ease of frequent visitors. Emily glanced around, perhaps looking for other guests. "Just us?" she asked, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "Just us," I confirmed. I thought this conversation should be private, at least at first. Robert's eyes darted to Emily's, something unspoken passing between them. That silent communication, the kind that comes from shared secrets, sent a fresh wave of hurt through me. "Let's sit down," I said, gesturing toward the dining room. "There's something we need to discuss before we eat." They followed me, exchanging another glance as they spotted the cassette player on the table. Emily's face paled slightly. "Mom, what is this about?" she asked, though her expression told me she already knew. "Please sit," I said, taking my own seat at the head of the table. They complied, Emily to my right, Robert to my left. The same seats they'd occupied at countless family dinners over the years. I looked at them both, these two people I had loved for decades, one as a daughter, one as a brother-in-law. Both had betrayed me in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. "After Margaret's funeral," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I found something hidden in the basement. A tape she had recorded, addressed to me. A confession of sorts." Emily's eyes closed briefly, her hands clenching into fists on the tablecloth. Robert sat perfectly still, his face a careful mask of neutrality. "On this tape," I continued, "Margaret revealed the truth about your parentage, Emily. A truth that apparently everyone knew except for me." "Mom," Emily started, but I held up a hand. "No, let me finish. For over 20 years, you've all decided what truth I was strong enough to hear. Today, it's my turn to speak." I pressed play on the cassette player. Margaret's voice filled the room, wavering slightly with the age of the recording. "The truth is that your daughter, Emily, never was the child of the man you believed to be her father. The blood that runs in her veins belongs to his brother instead." I watched their faces as the recording played. Emily's eyes filled with tears, her lower lip caught between her teeth, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Robert stared at the table, the muscles in his jaw working. Neither looked surprised, neither denied what they were hearing. When the tape clicked off, silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window in the gathering dusk. "Is it true?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed to hear them say it. Emily looked at Robert, then back to me. "Yes," she whispered. "It's true." Robert nodded slowly, finally meeting my eyes. "Helen, I'm so sorry, we never meant—" "Never meant what?" I interrupted, anger finally breaking through my careful composure. Never meant to lie to me for nearly 40 years? Never meant to make a fool of me? What exactly didn't you mean to do, Robert? We were trying to protect you, Emily said, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away. Protect me? I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. By deciding I was too weak to handle the truth about my own family? By whispering behind my back, by excluding me from reality? That's not protection, Emily. That's cruelty. It wasn't like that, she protested, tears spilling down her cheeks now. We loved you. We still love you. We didn't want to hurt you more than you'd already been hurt. The worst part, I said, my voice dropping to nearly a whisper, is that you thought so little of me, that you believed I couldn't survive knowing the truth, that you looked at me, at everything I've endured, everything I've overcome, and still saw someone too fragile to face reality. Robert cleared his throat. Helen, when Emily found out, she was just a teenager. She made a decision based on what she thought was right at the time. We all did. And in the 20 years since, I demanded, she became an adult. You both had countless opportunities to be honest with me. Instead, you chose to continue the lie, to let me build my life on a foundation of sand. Emily was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid you'd see me differently. That you wouldn't want me as your daughter anymore. The raw pain in her voice pierced through some of my anger. Despite everything, she was still my child. The baby I had rocked to sleep. The little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The young woman I had guided through heartbreak and triumph. Emily, I said, gentler now. Nothing could ever make me stop loving you. Not your parentage, not your choices, nothing. But love requires truth, it requires respect, and you both denied me that for decades. I looked between them, these two people who had shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. The weakness wasn't in me, I said finally. It was in your inability to face the consequences of your actions, in your decision to hide behind lies rather than stand in truth, however painful it might be. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in what we can endure, but in our willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful. Helen's journey reminds us that the lies we tell to protect others often cause deeper wounds than honesty ever could. After decades of being deemed too weak by those closest to her, she proved that true weakness lies in hiding from reality, not in confronting it. What would you do if you discovered your entire family had been keeping a life-altering secret from you? Would you seek revenge? Or like Helen, would you find the courage to stand in your truth and demand the respect of honesty? The hardest truths often bring the most healing, but only when we're brave enough to hear them. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more powerful true stories that make us question what family really means. Like, share, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Your story matters too.